Happy Holy Day, Moors, and welcome to House of Reawakening Minds. House of Reawakening Minds exists to provide for exploration and practice of spirituality in an enlightened community dedicated to honoring the myriad of sacred pathways to the universal creator. We are a holistic center for spiritual grounding, free thought, self-discovery, and Moorish science, an awakening experience for all ages. Tonight, I am pleased to present our National Grand Chief, Taj Tariq Bey, as he presents Collateral Damage, Casualties of Unum Sanctum and Doctrine of Discovery. Let's receive him.
Islam. We're going to discuss tonight collateral damage due, because it's really due to the ongoing and the entrenched Unum Sanctum operations, with most of you who are teachers and scholars and researchers and adepts are already aware of, being at the basis of the politics not only of the Western Hemisphere, but actually, for the most part, 90% of the operations on the planet Earth have been coming or functioning under Unum Sanctum policies, etc. The Roman Catholic Church Bulla, the demon-bred priesthood, etc. Now, collateral in its nature means something that's associated with or set aside or branch or supportive or an ancillary related but not considered main or focused thing, object, line, machinery, etc., or principle of social engineering, body politic, etc. Now, collateral damage is also a phrase that's used in military operations, whereas in the military operations, the aggressive or the active military operatives would consider destroying living beings or property or areas, land, or things that are not related to, rightfully, to the intended target, but is generally taken as a sacrifice or considered as par for course for sacrifice. And so when you hear politicians refer to when they're making incursions into other political jurisdictions, lands, etc., and you see them make or hear them make statements like collateral damage in war, they're talking about innocent people or who die, who are injured by virtue of their activity, but are rightfully not the target and are actually innocents. And the one of the reasons we're discussing that is because many of our people on multiple fronts have been injured severely, politically, economically, and socially by virtue of wrongs done or violations done or crimes against humanity done in the name of government sovereign powers, etc., or government political jurisdictions and military logistic operations, etc. Now, the things that we're going to talk about are, we'll note a few documentations, including Executive Order 11490, particularly since the United States government corporation has went bankrupt again in 2019 again, and by law and international law, they actually have no right to operate whatsoever. However, many of you know that they continue to operate and they continue to have elections to dead offices that were in fact from the beginning of their operations, particularly since 1871, de facto in the first instance. And we have the unfortunate situation where particularly the Aboriginal people of the land the people of Canaanite Moabite descent, commonly referred to as Moors, falsely presented as Indians, blacks, Negroes, colored people of color, etc., Latinos, etc., who are actually Al-Moroccans, or the real Americans, and also falsely referred to as Native Americans. You know, it's like saying real water. No, if it's water, it's water. You know, Americans are Americans, and those who are not Americans are not Americans. It's like you wouldn't say necessarily Native Asians, you know, or Native Africans. You say Africans. You say Africans. So that's collateral damage. The collateral damage is both the misinformation that has been passed from generation to generation, that has been a severe economic injury to our people. And so I'm going to I'm going to look at certain notes of their own documentation, which I will present to you in quotes of their operations, so that most of the people who are listening and people who come here and share the evenings with us at the House of Reawakening Minds, and also those of you who may come the official office hours of Dr. G, she'll deal with a lot of different issues of trying to help humanity, etc., which is basically what we're trying to do. We want to share with you the documentations in some of these areas to give support to the positions that we hold in relationship to the entertainment of and exercise of rights unalienable that already belong to the people, that many of the people are not aware of. Now, of course, this information is nothing new to all of you who've been sharing with us, because we've been teaching this stuff for 40 years, truthfully. However, because of the political atmosphere that's taking place right now, particularly with the people being under biological attack by people who they falsely have assumed was their government, I find it necessary to touch bases on some of these things. And particularly, again, because some of you being attacked by corporate operatives who actually should not be doing business whatsoever, but are claiming to be government, that are putting tyrannical rules and mandatory civil actions against the people to injure you, and your right to feed your families, and your rights to travel, and your rights to do business and trade with each other, in violation of human rights, in violation of international law, in violation of constitutional law, in violation of treaty law, and in violation of humanity at large. And so all of this is given to you with the forethought on your part, and write this down, keep in mind, particularly, though most of you know this, for those of you who don't, the Congress adjourned sine die, March 27th, 1861. That's the Congress for the United States in treaty operations to do business on the land, North America, in trade, etc. The persons holding those positions of authority via treaty and constitution breached their honor, breached their oaths of office, and actually secretly and some openly began misprision activities to overthrow the republic and to deny or to abridge or abort their obligations to the treaties that supersede the Constitution. And as you all know, the Constitution for the United States comes from the Honesty Confederation of Aboriginal Moors at North America, that has been reconstructed in history as being Indians, etc. And so also the Honesty Confederation is also referred to in Reconstruction as the Iroquois Indians. And so the Constitution principles of fatwa come from divine principles of Hermetic law, which is the culture of the people, of the earth for the most part, of the Aboriginal people, and all of the people derived from the Fanti, Mandinka, etc., Phoenician tribes of Africa, with the Berber linguistic groups, etc., that have been occupying or domiciling at North America and around the planet for multiple thousands of years, not a couple, multiple compound thousands of years, etc. So the principles upon which we have operated government are well established, and they are in their general form what you would call hermetic in their character or thought, as you would look at in ancient Egypt, that is also referred to as Egypt, etc. Those principles of divine law brought into a civil level, which we would call legislative or ens legis operations, etc. Principles of jurisprudence, harmonic with the divine laws of nature, that recognize the allodial principle and principles of the human form or the spirit man exercising the experience in the physical form, etc. And so the principles of the Constitution for the United States are very, very ancient, while adopted to operate at the North or at the North Gate, at the Maghreb, etc., must we recognize that these principles have been abridged by persons claiming to be Congress and senators. So 1861, the coup d'etat, and most of you already know about the plotted and planned assassination of Abraham Lincoln. You also know that Abraham Lincoln was the last lawful president for the Republic. After Abraham Lincoln, there was no lawful president operating the corporation operations on the land in harmony with Constitution, treaties, etc., to this very day. And as we're speaking now, it's 2021. One of the problems that you have is most of the people, having been misdirected and miseducated, are still operating mentally from the concept that these people who have been causing them injury, who are openly causing them injury now, really openly, the problem that they have is that they don't understand that these people are not their government, never been. They've been self-serving themselves and private parties around the globe under the unum sanctum operations, and over the decades, for these last couple of centuries particularly, they have created so much of bedlam and din upon the planet Earth that civilization now itself is being threatened. However, it's also the duty and responsibility of those who know, and it's also the duty and responsibility of those who are part and parcel of organized government to tell the truth about what's going on, in order for the people at large, those who would be willing to no longer consent to fraudulent political platforms that essentially cause injury to themselves and to their families, to their estates, and of course undermine the legitimacy of any legitimate governmental form or format, etc., which causes a state of what you would call institutionalized misprision and treason by virtue of intent on those who have taken oaths of office and breached, but by default with many of the people who are political parties or parts of these operations who do not know that the United States Corporation Company is not the country. It is a trading company doing business by virtue of treaty at Morocco or at North America. And that Constitution for those operations is the Constitution for the United States. Not to be confused with the contemporary operations of misprision of the Circle Church and Chancery, which has been taught to the people, referred to as the Constitution of the United States, which is a private distortion of misprision for the purpose of continuing collateral damage and thievery and extortion and pilfery and false taxation in violation of national law and international law and treaty law, and actually constitutes crimes against humanity. And so we're going to bring up some of these things to give you a concept of the collateral damage. So collateral damage, as an example, let's talk an example. Like say, for instance, if you have a flower pot in your window and you're on an upper floor of a building and you decide that you don't want that flower pot because the flower died or something like that, and you just wantonly thrown it out the window and it struck someone on the ground or it splattered and cut someone who was walking by with the pot shattering, that would be called collateral damage. You're responsible for that. However, it may have been and may not have been your intention to cause injury. However, that's called collateral damage. All right, so in political jurisdictional matters, when you have, say, a defunct or dissolved corporation operation, whereas, say, executors or board of directors of a corporate entity that was dissolved or disintegrated or adjourned sine die, and they move to another area and continue operations in order to project the guise of sovereign right of authority, and then tax the people. They're robbing the people, and then using that finance actually to build a machinery, a political, legal machinery, both judicial and legislative, and used against the people to blackmail them into defense systems that are really not designed to defend them, but to cause them. Pharmaceutical systems that are designed to actually make the people sick so that they can extort from them forced financial debts and bills, etc. Well, the fact of the matter is that has been going on since the 1800s. In fact, not fictional, in fact. So let's go to Executive Order 11490 and actually read their own operations. Now, this was essentially constructed under the Democratic Ku Klux Klan party operations of the Democratic Party, with the considerations of the missionary military works of Bedford, etc., which you can do research on. So I'll read their own documentation so that you can understand the politics that are taking place now, and also why, like say, when they want to do biological attacks on the people, you will hear them say things like, we want to make sure that we do a pharmaceutical attack on the Black and Latino communities. These are tags. Keep that in mind. When you hear terms like that, those are biological war attacks. This is their own documentation, so that you can understand that what you may assume to be some decisions that are made currently, that these positions were already in place, that these politicians are not your friends, they're not your government, they do not have your best interests at heart, and they have no authority to do what they're doing. However, this is their own documents. I quote unquote, this would be in Silent Weapons Executive Order 11490, and this is page 48 on, this is what all of the politicians sit in secret, both federal, state, and local, and plot and plan executing in targeted communities. Consent. Consent. The primary weapon. Diversion. Summary. Media. Keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. Schools. Keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history. 3. Entertainment. Keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level. Work. Keep the public busy, 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 with no time to think back on the farm with the other animals. An interjection. This is their words, but I'm interjecting this. It must be remembered that they are operating under what is known as animal husbandry. We'll deal with that in another class. However, animal husbandry. Research that and understand their operations toward you, toward your family, toward your children, and this is why they treat the children the way they treat them. This is why they deliberately, not accidentally, miseducate them. This is why they do not teach the children basic etymon degrees or etymology, period, nor orthology, to prepare them for the workload that's put on them, which is demonstrated in the General Education Board of 1902 philosophy page available to all adults who've been sending your children to these people who you thought were your government, who are not. Back to their words, quote unquote, consent, the primary victory. A silent weapon system operates upon data. And keep in mind, you keep giving them your data, and you think we require you to give us this data because we need to make your peanut butter sandwiches just this square. And you keep playing, and they're weaponizing it against you. And keep in mind, they're not your government. They just told you they were. A silent weapon system operates upon data obtained from a docile public by legal but not always lawful force. Much information is made available to silent weapon systems programmers through the Internal Revenue Service. See studies in the structure of the American economy for an IRS source list. This information consists of the enforced delivery of well-organized data obtained in federal and state tax forms, collected, assembled, and submitted by slave labor, provided by taxpayers and employees, and furthermore, the number of such forms submitted to the IRS is a useful indicator for public consent, quote unquote, public consent, an important factor in strategic decision making. Other data sources are given in the short list of inputs, quote unquote, short list of inputs, consent coefficients, numerical feedback indicating victory status, psychological basis. When the government, quote unquote, and keep in mind they're de facto, is able to collect tax and seize private property without just compensation. Why are they saying that? Because they know that they are not government. It is an indication that the public is ripe for surrender and is consenting to enslavement and legal encroachment. A good and easily qualified indicator of harvest time is the number of public citizens who pay income tax despite an obvious lack of reciprocal or honest service. Amplification, energy sources. The next step in the process of designing an economic amplifier is discovering the energy sources. The energy sources which support any primitive economic system are, of course, a supply of raw materials and the consent of the people to labor and consequently assume a certain rank, a certain position, a certain level, or a certain class in the social structure, i.e., to provide labor at various levels in the pecking order. Keep in mind, animal husbandry, each class, in guaranteeing its own level of income, controls the class immediately below it, hence preserves the class structure. And this provides stability and security, but also government from the top. As the time goes on and the communications and education improve, the lower class elements of the social labor structure become knowledgeable and envious of the good things that the upper class members have. They also begin to obtain or attain a knowledge of energy systems and the ability to enforce their rise through the class structure. Now, this threatens the sovereignty of the elite, i.e., the de facto government imposters. Keep in mind, they're aware that they're imposters, but they know that the people don't know that they're imposters. Now, if this rise of the lower class can be postponed long enough, the elite, and this is what they choose for themselves, they refer to themselves as the elite, can achieve energy dominance, and labor by consent no longer will hold a position of an essential economic energy source. And until such energy dominance is absolutely established, the consent of the people to labor and to let others handle their affairs must be taken into consideration. And since failure to do so could cause the people to interfere in the final transfer of energy sources to the control of the elite, it is essential to recognize that at this time, public consent is still an essential key to the release of energy in the process of economic amplification. And therefore, consent as an energy release mechanism will now be considered. Now that is Executive Order 11490. I'm just moving the page so they can look at both pages. Now I'm going to go into the Corporation Excise Act of 1909. Keep these timelines, dates in place. Because remember, 1909, those of you who are scholars, you already know when the letter was written to Secretary Roots in 06, and he referred to how the Moors lost their birthright by virtue agreeing to the Nationalization Act. That would be the 14th Amendment operations. That's totally connected to this. So keep that in concept. Then 1909, 1910, when the operatives with the misprision was meeting again on Jekyll Island, etc., with members of the Circle Church and Chancery and the Crown Order, representing the de facto Queen of England, etc., in their Trinity relationship with the Popes of Rome and the bishopric, etc., and of course with their operations of transferring or solidifying the unum sanctum seat of operations in Washington, D.C. at the Seven Hills that Pope gave them, etc., near the Potomac River, for their operations of their corporation, which they reestablished, etc., after the overthrow of the Republic via the overthrow of the Lincoln administration.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're happy to announce that we are offering trustee training and notary classes for all interested parties, Monday through Friday. For more details, please feel free to reach out to us at 904-490-0297. Again, that number is 904-490-0297. We can be reached from the times of 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday, and you can also reach us 12 to 4 on Saturdays. If you can't reach us there on the line, please feel free to drop us an email at B as in boy, I as in Isaac, D as in David, I as in indigo, I as in indigo, L as in Larry, B as in boy, E as in Edward, Y as in yarn at gmail.com. Again, that email is BIDZIILBEY at gmail.com. And remember, if you're interested in getting your affairs in order, you need to start by getting your mind right. Peace and love.
1909. And for those of you who are students of jurisprudence, that the Corporation Excise Act of 1909 was adjudicated in the Flint versus Stone Tracy Company case 220 U.S. 107, and that was in 1911. 31 Circuit Court or Supreme Court 349, wherein the Supreme Court said, and pay attention to this because this is very important, because this is where many of you are even presently in collateral damage and may not be aware of it, etc. Quote unquote, the tax under consideration may be described as an excise upon the particular privilege of doing business in a corporate capacity, i.e., with the advantages which arise from corporate or quasi-corporate organization. And requirement to pay such taxes involves the exercise of privileges, unquote. Now, put that in perspective, and then you understand why when the political operatives of the coup d'etat of 1861 and their corporate successors will always communicate with the general people of the land in mail with all capital letters, because they're declaring you a corporate ward. Keep that in mind. So when you look at mail coming to you in any form, in any so-called tax form or any alleged coupon, quote unquote, which they don't tell you, bill, coupon, bill, it will be in all capital letters. I'm showing you why it's done, so that you can make your decisions and take your responsibility to stop consenting to being misrepresented as a corporation that is under the wardship of their bodily instruments of the Circle Church and Chancery, registered or operative in at Fleet Street, England, etc. So therefore, all legislation concerning taxation, etc., by the people not knowing the collateral damage operations, are not aware that those decisions are made in England. They're made in England for the corporate operations of the United States Corporation Company, which has been misrepresented by the politicians as the country, which it was not and is not. And it's defunct. That must be made aware to you. You must be made aware of that. Now, so the reader is strongly and wisely advised to thoroughly research and study the etymology and the definitions of the following words and phrases, and use a good law dictionary and an unabridged dictionary, a thesaurus, and be sure to take notes. I'm going to give you 19 words just for starters. Review this if you have to. Go over this so that you can start repairing, because we're going to need a lot of healing Because I'm telling you right now, a lot of things are going to be coming out in these coming months that are going to verify all these things we've been telling you all for years. However, the interest of why we're dealing with this collateral damage tonight is because many of these people who are criminals, who have been pretending to be government, are on a missionary operations of injuring the people rather than to be, as you might say, found out for who they really are. And that includes the priesthood who've been working with them too. People who you've trusted that in many, and it's not just one, all the so-called religious organizations who have been living wealthy at the expense of the widow's pennies or at the poor, when you find out their real connections to these people who you thought were government, and that you thought these people were so-called godly, and you find out that they really were partners, they're desperately trying to keep the public from really finding this out. However, all this information is coming out anyway. However, our interest is that the masses of the people have limited injury by these people who are intentionally injuring them and willing to sacrifice them as collateral damage to protect their own criminality, also their own exposure. So keep these words, these 19 words, write them down, and research them so you can have a good comprehension of what we're discussing at this particular cycle of time. 1, excise. Excise, that's EXCISE. 2, taxes. 3, corporation. 4, capacity. 5, requirement. 6, privilege. 7, rights. 8, constitution. 9, person. 10, personality. 11, unalienable and inalienable. Those words are relative. Unalienable and inalienable. 12, jurisdiction. 13, pecuniary wages. That's very important in the subject at this moment. Pecuniary wages. 14, in propria persona. 15, fraud. 16, unconscionable. 17, artifice. 18, de facto. 19, de jure. Keep those in mind, and they will lead you to other law and legal terms that would be very important to you to reduce the collateral damage to yourselves and to your families. Now, I want to continue and deal with the misrepresentation of the 16th Amendment for the excise tax, coming from the excise tax, and the misrepresentation of natural people as corporate entities in order to impose a tax under de facto or color rule, color of office, and color of authority that has been the basis of the economic stock market since 1913 era, operating with a de facto and already dissolved corporate entity known as the United States of America Corporation, and has been operating since then, and has in fact been bankrupted again twice since then. Most of you already know this, but what they put it this way: They not only put insult on injury, they put injury on insult on injury. And the people have not caught on yet. Now that things are collapsing literally around them, many people do not understand that they're being sacrificed politically and economically, and they also want to, they will say, reduce the population rather than say genocide the people out. All right? In other words, they're willing to kill the people to cover up their own criminality. So, Amendment 16 of 1913. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on income. Now, keep in mind, this is the excise tax. From whatever source derived without apportionment, which is already unconstitutional, among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. Now, the history of the enactment and subsequent ratification of the 16th Amendment discloses beyond a doubt that the intent and the purpose of the 16th Amendment was to tax income derived from government-granted privileges, and particularly from corporate activities, and the profits arising from the quote-unquote sale of commodities, and the profits arising from those sale of commodities and the capital assets. So let's write this down so that you can stay very clear and keep up where we're going with this. The income tax is specifically and only addressing corporate activities of the sale of commodities and other capital assets. Fact. The 16th Amendment and the corporate activities, operations, and the sales of commodities activities and the taxing relative to that did not expand the taxing authority that already constitutionally exists, not whatsoever. It only clarified the arguments and the limitations of such taxation. And for those of you who want to do some research, I'll give you another case that you can look up. It will be Pollock, that's Pollock, versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. 157 U.S. 429, 158 U.S. 601, that's 1895. And the Supreme Court has declared the Federal Income Tax Act of 1894 unconstitutional for want of apportionment, because income, quote-unquote, and property, quote-unquote, parenthesized capital, were indistinguishable, and an excise tax cannot burden property for want of due process. Repeat. Supreme Court for the United States, 1894 and 1895, declared the Federal Income Tax Act of 1894 unconstitutional for want of apportionment, and an excise tax cannot burden property for want of due process. And later, in the Speckle Sugar Refrigeration Company versus McLean, 192 U.S. 397, 1004, the Supreme Court declared and ruled and affirmed that the Congress for the United States has the delegated power to tax, quote-unquote, income arising from the government-granted privileges of incorporation. This is why they have fraudulently been misrepresenting and committing estate and grammatical violations against the people by writing their names and appellations in all capital letters to misclassify them as corporations under their defunct corporation, and thus being able to liquefy or make fungible their estates for their own purposes, being that the people are declared foreign corporate entities without their consent, without their knowledge, and by virtue of misrepresentation, which is why they do the all capital letters when they send instruments to your homes, etc., through the mail, which is also mail fraud. Now, having this defeat, suffered defeat, this is the de facto Congress. Having suffered defeat in the Pollock case, supra, the Congress was apparently aware of, but pretended to be unaware that it could tax corporate profits, or they may have, because of other political compromises and considerations, chosen to feign an oversight of their limited delegated taxing authority. And so public officials know that a profit on investment or on a return above principal expenditures, quote unquote, constitutes an income. And the labors, listen to this carefully, the labors and the pecuniary compensations of the common worker and common citizen is not income. I'm repeating, this is the rule. Public officials know that a profit on investment or return above, quote unquote, principal expenditures constitutes an income. And even then, as you can see, it's limited. However, the labors and the pecuniary compensations of the common worker and citizen is not income, is not income, is not income. The right to work is not a privilege. Supreme Court ruling. The foregoing can be verified from the pages of the Congressional Record of the Senate of 1909 as follows. June the 16th, 1909, S3344. June the 17th, 1909, S3377. June 28, 1909, S3900. June 29, 1909, S3935 and S3936. June the 30th, 1909, S3976. July 2nd, 1909, S4043. And during the debates which ensued, the Senate frequently adverted to the Speckles sugar case, supra, as a standard upon which to pattern the 16th Amendment. And consequently, the 16th Amendment, SJ Resolution 40, and a Corporation Excise Act, H.R. 1438, 36 Statute 112, was introduced on June the 28th to the 29th of 1909. And so the express purpose of the 16th Amendment was to avert once and for all the issue presented in the Pollock versus Farmer Loan and Trust Company, supra, i.e. under the 16th Amendment, income and property capital were not and are not synonymous. See why they miseducate you? And see the collateral damage that has been done to targeted communities over generations, where local and state and federal persons claiming to be legitimate government have actually robbed the people for their own personal gain since 1913, and far beyond that since 1871, and they have built massive wealth on it and then used that very wealth against the people while claiming to be government when in fact they are color of office, color of authority, and legislating under a color of law And all the miseries that you all are running into right now is the collateral damage of that great fraud and lie that continues to this very day. And it's been done maliciously, it's been done knowingly, it's been done with local and state politicians well aware of it. Now you understand why they have been running campaigns in the numbers of millions and millions and quadrillion millions of dollars for jobs that compensate only a couple of a couple of 100,000, and why within a short period all of them are wealthy, and you wonder why your communities are targeted. And then you have poor people, you have homeless people all over the place, you have women struggling with children, because the de facto magistrates who've been pretending to be constitutional judges, who are not, actually have stock in private prisons under silent weapons for quiet wars, and they have been deliberately, and it's in their own documents, breaking up your families and running the men out of the homes for the purpose of human trafficking. So now it makes it available for the women and the children to be vulnerable to corporate state operations, and under the guise of human services, they've been stealing people's children. That's exactly what they've been doing, and that's a fact. Now, many of you always knew this, and many of you are in denial. However, the consequence of these things having gone unaddressed are now destroying societies. And you, me, and we all have been collateral damage. However, one of the problems that is greatly damaging to people is that many people trying to be in their minds what they thought was, quote unquote, although that's still improper, good citizens, were paying taxes to destroy their own families and being poor in the process. Collateral damage. That's what it is. Now, also, let me go a little further so that you can understand this is not opinion, this is their own documentation. This is congressional records. This is Supreme Court cases. This is executive orders, and you see some of these politicians writing all kinds of executive orders now, and these people are still unaware of what executive orders are. They don't even know that they're not even constitutional. However, let us go on, because this is to try to help the people. But you must help yourself, starting with stop consenting. Hold on. What is income within the meaning of the law of the 16th Amendment of the Constitution? Now, in relation, and I have a lot of other law cases here to support. The decision relative to the Supreme Court is noteworthy since the court reviewed and relied upon most of the foregoing case laws and citations presented before arriving at its conclusion. As an example, again, in the Goodrich versus Edwards case, 225 U.S. 527, that's 1921, the Supreme Court defines income as follows. The Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, they were de facto, but still, the definition of quote-unquote income approved by this court is, quote-unquote, pay attention to this, you all, the gain derived from capital, from labor, or from both combined, provided it be understood to include profits gained through sale or conversion of capital assets. That's the Eisner versus McCumber case, 252 U.S. 189, 207, 441 Supreme Court at 391. Now, the gain derived from quote-unquote labor contemplated in this Goodrich case, however, supra, And in previous and subsequent cases where the phrase is used means the actual gain or profit derived from contracting the services of laborers or employees. And this refers to gains acquired above and beyond the principal investment. Above and beyond the principal investment. Moreover, the pecuniary, and this is important, pecuniary wage, that's P-E-C-U-N-I-A-R-Y, that's pecuniary. Get very clear on what this is. That's why they don't teach you civics. So the pecuniary wage considerations or compensations which, quote unquote, natural persons derive from salaries, employments, wages, and occupations are not, they are not income. They are distinct from and not included in the aforementioned definition of income. There we go. That's the law. Law is. That's the law is. You want to know why your families are poor? You want to know why they're poisoning you? Do you know that the U.S. corporation went bankrupt again in 2019, and that they've been operating unlawful, and that's the real reason why all of this other confusion all of a sudden arise up to cover up the fact that they went bankrupt, and that the federal employees retirement fund was the last large financial holdings under the United States corporation. It's gone. So all of a sudden you got this all this stuff going on. Everybody getting sick, and everybody got to wear 1 mask, 2 masks, 3 masks, 4 masks, 5 masks, 6 masks, when they know that viruses are 10,000 times smaller than the fibers of these masks. Just as an example for people who keep consenting to what they know is a fraud, and you know is a fraud. But if you're willing to sacrifice your family members and your children to these people, then keep in mind you're consenting. Don't blame some mystical devil, because ain't no mystical devil done nothing to you. You've consented to these evil people who are actual demons who have missionaries in your communities who knowingly take oaths to the popes of Rome and pull you into the pits of hell and ignorance. And they call it a pulpit. They don't even hide it. And you pretend that your miseries is coming from some mystical devil, when the pits of hell is actually the executor's chambers that's operated from England beneath all the churches. That means these places that you thought were holy places of worship have executor's chambers beneath them to punish people who haven't been paying these excise taxes to these fake government operatives who've been pretending to be government, who are actually warring against the people. That's why they call it silent weapons. And that's only an aspect of it. Now, that's a fact. Now, for those of you, because you know we have a lot of people who've always known this information, they won't teach it because it doesn't make finance for them. And then you have others who always claim to love the people, but you'll see them, they'll never put their necks out on the line to get out here to help the people. They will be on armchairs and talk through other people to criticize the people who are really doing the work. But they have a lot of titles, though. And they've been doing this stuff for years. But you don't never see them, do you? And they don't produce literature, do they, to help the people? But they got a lot of things to say about the people who are doing the work, don't they? They're called armchair authorities. That's kind of a de facto position too. It's another reason why we're showing you some of their own documentation. Now, this is their opinions of you coming from the cottonwigs of the Whiggamore Party that you know best as called the Democratic Party. And that is not supporting the Republican Party either, just because I'm telling you this history. Because this is the truth. This is their position with you. For the persons who call themselves Democrats, this is their papers on how they deal with you. And this is what their opinions are of you. Logistics. The successful application of a strategy requires a careful study of inputs, outputs, and the strategy connecting the inputs and the outputs and the available energy sources to fuel the strategy. And this study is called logistics. A logistical problem is studied at the elementary level first, and then levels of greater complexity are studied as a synthesis of elementary factors. Now, this means that a given system is analyzed, and such system is broken down into its subsystems, and these in turn are analyzed until by this process, one arrives at the logistical, quote-unquote, atom, the individual. And this is where the process of synthesis properly begins, and at the time of the birth of the individual. Subtitle: The Artificial Womb. From the time a person leaves its mother's womb, its every effort is directed toward building, maintaining, and withdrawing into artificial wombs various sorts of substitute protective devices or shells. The objective of these artificial wombs is to provide a stable environment for both stable and unstable activity, and to provide a shelter for the evolutionary processes of growth and maturity, i.e. survival, to provide security for freedom, and to provide definitive protection for offensive activity. Now, this is equally true of both the general public and of the elite. However, there is a definite difference in the way each of these classes go about the solution of problems. Subtitle: The Political Structure of a Nation, Dependency. The primary reason why the individual citizens of a country create a political structure is a subconscious wish or desire to perpetrate their own dependency relationship of childhood. So they hire politicians to face reality for them. Summary: the people hire politicians so that the people can, 1, obtain security without managing it. 2, obtain action without thinking about it. 3, inflict injury, theft, and death upon others without having to contemplate either life or death. 4, avoid responsibility for their own intentions. 5, obtain the benefits of reality and of science without exercising or exerting themselves in the discipline of facing or learning either of these things. They give the politicians the power to create and to manage a war machine to, 1, provide for the survival of the nation/womb, 2, to prevent encroachment of anything upon the nation/womb, 3, to destroy those citizens of their country who do not conform for the sake of stability of the nation/womb. And politicians hold many quasi-military jobs. The lowest quasi-military job being the police, which are soldiers. The attorneys and the CPAs next, who are spies and saboteurs who are licensed. And the judges who shout the orders and run to close the union military shop for whatever the market will bear. The generals are industrialists. The presidential level of commander-in-chief is shared by the international bankers. And the people know that they have created this farce and financed it with their own taxes, quote-unquote, consent. But they would rather knuckle under than be the hypocrite. And thus a nation becomes divided into two very distinct parts: a docile subnation and a political subnation. The political subnation remains attached to the docile subnation, tolerates it, and leeches its substance until it grows strong enough to detach itself and devour its parent.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're happy to announce that we are offering trustee training and notary classes for all interested parties, Monday through Friday. For more details, please feel free to reach out to us at 904-490-0297. Again, that number is 904-490-0297. We can be reached from the times of 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday, and you can also reach us 12 to 4 on Saturdays. If you can't reach us there on the line, please feel free to drop us an email at B as in boy, I as in Isaac, D as in David, I as in indigo, I as in indigo, L as in Larry, B as in boy, E as in Edward, Y as in yarn at gmail.com. Again, that email is BIDZIILBEY at gmail.com. And remember, if you're interested in getting your affairs in order, you need to start by getting your mind right. Peace and love, family.